Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Perspectives of Politics, the talk show where members of the CU Senior Seminar Political Science class from 2020 get together to talk about some of the most important issues of the day. I have joining me our current panel of guests from top to bottom as they appear on my screen. I have Hunter Biden. Hunter, good morning. How are you today? Hunter Kelly.
I'm doing well.
Hunter Wilson is here as well. How are you doing, Hunter?
Doing fine. How are you?
Doing well. Malcolm Walker is joining us too. Malcolm, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing fantastic. And last but not least, Lydia Manley. Lydia, good morning.
Good morning.
So let's go ahead and get started. Today we are talking about a little bit of a different topic than the first three that we covered. Today we're going to be talking about the American prison system, and specifically we're going to be examining the question of prison reform. Prison reform was at one point a pretty hot, politically charged, partisan topic. However, in the last few years, there actually appears to have been some movement on both sides, with a couple of compromised pieces of legislation being passed in both the Obama and Trump administration. And so today we want to discuss if more prison reform is needed, if past prison reform is successful, and if we are going to continue down this path, what sorts of changes might be necessary. So to get started, for our viewers who are at home, would you guys do me a favor and just kind of explain what the American prison system looks like, and some of its key characteristics for people who might be unfamiliar?
So one of the things that I kind of researched, because I honestly was pretty unfamiliar with the topic, is just looking at the difference of like private prisons and public prisons, because I'd heard of them, but I never really understood the difference. And just like doing research, one thing that really struck me was how, when I was researching private prisons, how a lot of times they are less likely to report on like inmate population data and staffing and like where their budget's spent. So that's like one thing that I researched, was just the difference of those. And then really just like the difference of those two is, comes down to money. So that's just something that I found that, really helped me when researching this topic.
How much more complicated does the federal nature of the United States make the prison system? Is it harder to manage because of it? Is it harder to reform?
It's like harder to reform, like in the way of, like rehabilitation or corruption, or I just need like some clarity, I guess.
Well, so logically, if you were to have a top-down prison system where all prisoners in America were being controlled by the same justice system, that's going to be a little bit different than a prison system where you have a national prison authority as well as 50 different state authorities that are operating statewide, countywide, and also citywide jails. And I'm just curious if the structure of that makes the prison systems harder to manage. Does it make it harder to reform? Is it a good thing or a bad thing that we have a complicated system?
Oh, definitely. I'd say it makes it more complicated. I mean, when you think about state-run prisons and privately ran prisons, I mean, definitely, I know for sure we have some certain systems set up to make sure, there's fair treatment, the prisoners are treated equally, and there's certain rights and rules, but I'm sure some stuff does get lost in translation along the way.
Yeah, I agree with Hunter. I believe that it is more, difficult to be able to reform it because there are private prisons that work on their own agenda and how they facilitate their money, as well as public is governmental, and so I guess it would be easier for the public-owned prisons to have more communications in their ways and like guidelines to be able to reform their prisons.
Do all prisons or all states that have prisons, do they have the same goals for their prison system? Like, is it just simply that if you're a criminal, we want to lock you up and keep you there, or is the concept of prisons in America more complicated than that?
I feel to some extent that it is the goal of some prisons to get crime off the streets. However, you can see certain prisons that are dealing more with rehabilitation or recidivism. They're trying to get the inmate back into society and become a productive member of society. So I think there could be both ways, but we definitely see more of just cleaning up the streets than we do rehabilitation.
Is that? Do you think that's a function of the personality of Americans, of American culture, or is it just simply more economically efficient? If the only thing that I'm worried about is just making sure the bad guys stay locked up.
It could be more economically efficient to do that. However, if you had increased prison sentences, you gotta pay for the prisoners to live. Like, you got to give them the cost of their living. So I'm not sure if it's more economically stable to release them or more economically stable to keep them. I would like to see them get released and become productive members of the economy and society, though.
You guys, one of y'all used the term recidivism. For viewers who might not be familiar with that term, what exactly does recidivism mean, and why is it important to the conversation of prison reform?
Its general definition is the tendency of a convicted criminal to reoffend. It matters in the sense that this is exactly what the prison system should try to avoid in order to promote social stability and a strain on the already bloated prison system. I'm sure we've talked about overpopulation. And I feel like this issue, we're kind of unsure on what that definition truly is. Is it truly reoffending for new crimes and new charge, or is it like a technical violation? But it's kind of like the idea of punishment or rehabilitation. You try to ensure that recidivism does not occur through one of those two means.
You had mentioned the size of the prison population. Any guesses or any estimates about how many Americans are currently somewhere in the prison system? Or do we just assume that it's more than what we want?
When I was kind of researching the topic, I mean, this could be really off. Is it about 2 million or is it more than that?
Yeah, I got it. It was around 2.2 million people in prison.
So that's people who are living full time within the facility, where taxpayers are providing 3 hots and a cot. Is that number something that's been going down? Is it relatively stable? Is the problem the size of the prison population, or is it the fact that the population is continuing to grow? What exactly is the source for the calls for prison reform?
Well, I think one thing that we've seen kind of just the rise in prisoners is really just like the war on drugs, which, people argue could have had good effects or bad effects. But, I think it definitely has made the numbers go up. So I think that's one cause of it. There obviously could be a lot more.
Anybody else? Do you think that the size of the population of prisons is going up or down? Why do you think it's changing?
Well, when you think about the past 3 or 4 years, I've always heard the term tough on crime, from politicians coming in and out. Up until recently now, there's been talks of reforms such as legalizing marijuana, which it's a lot of drug charges that would be wiped clean. But I would say there have been some moves to decrease that population as far as the prison system as of late.
So coming back to this idea of recidivism, if recidivism is whether or not a person goes back into prison, would one strategy to stop recidivism just to be, like you said, be tough on crime? If I put you in jail, you're never getting out again. Why do we even consider releasing prisoners back into the general population if they're there for a reason?
I think the general hope is that they return to society and they, are essentially a cog in the wheel, to put it, in terms that may or not sound too good. But yeah, the hope that they can contribute to society again, become a contributing person, individual. Again, the prison system can't care for and pay for a person. It's expensive, right? It's going to cost money to keep them there. But that's the idea, at least, is to get them back in society and back to where they're contributing.
I agree with Hunter. Like, you want to be able to put them back into society and kind of rehabilitate them in a way, but you also want to sustain their Eighth Amendment right that the Constitution gives them. And cruel and unusual punishment would be keeping them in there for a longer extent of time than what they should be.
So if my goal is to cycle people through the system and have them never come back again, how would I need to structure a prison system differently than if my goal were to just lock them up and throw away the key?
I believe you'd have to focus. Oh, go ahead.
No, you got to answer.
Okay. I would say if that's more so your approach, the focus would be on rehabilitation then, and that would be through different programs that you would try to implement. It'd be like the medical model. We went through a stage, I think it was like the 1940s or 50s, where we associated crime with medical issues, and we started looking at it in a different approach. We approached it as, okay, you're committing crime because you have some sort of mental deficiency, and so we're going to treat it as such. But if in that case, we would try to be focusing on rehabilitation, and punishment would be more so just thrown to the wayside. There'd be a whole different approach to it.
All right, I'd like to just add on to what Hunter said. Certain programs that could help in the rehabilitation would be giving them a skill trait, learn a trait, whether it's welding, plumbing, just some kind of trait that they could utilize when they get out of prison, because we all know that it's entirely too hard to find a job when you're coming straight out of prison, especially with a felony. I mean, they need to be able to have some kind of skill to sustain economic life for themselves.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I would just say that, when it comes to the system, we really need to figure out where our priorities lay. Is it on rehabilitation? Is it not? We just have to figure out what programs work best and start implementing those.
Do you guys think that rehabilitation should be a primary goal or a secondary goal of the prison system? How much emphasis, or maybe to put it in a different way, how much money should we be spending on rehabilitation as a proportion of our total prison spending?
I think it should be a primary goal. America has the highest population rate of people in prison, and also the highest percentage per capita in the world of incarcerated citizens. So I think it should be a big goal, the primary goal, to release, bring people back into the society and help them be, working members and do things productive.
I think it all depends on the level of crime as well, to add on to that. You don't want convicted felons necessarily, murderers, rapists, robbers, armed robbery. You don't want those guys getting the same kind of rehabilitation treatment as you would just a drug criminal, because I believe a drug criminal would be a lot more likely to be able to go back into society without having any issues. So I think we should pick and choose which ones.
I think it definitely depends on the crime. Yeah. More nonviolent, I would say, sure, rehabilitation. You can probably go through this and make it out and become, a functioning member of society. But for somebody like a serial killer or serial rapist, that's, you're going to have to look at that in more of a punishment aspect. I mean, the victims they're going to be wanting some type of punishment or revenge, and I guess that's the whole point of the prison system, is legal justice you can serve on people like that.
You had also mentioned, or one of you guys had mentioned, I apologize for remembering which one, that if part of the problem is whether or not people re-enter the prisons, that the first part of the problem is how many people enter the prison system in the first place. You guys had mentioned drugs, drug addiction, drug abuse as being one of the causes of an increase in prison population. Are there things that we could do to reduce the number of first-time offenders? Is the problem really just drug use, or are there other issues that can be addressed? How do we keep people from going to prison in the first place?
I think you start at a younger age. Juvenile delinquency is one of the main topics in the U.S. prison system, how to prevent juvenile delinquency. If we get and teach these moral values to them at a younger age, I feel like they would be less likely to perform in delinquency, because the morals that they have when they perform the delinquent acts are something that we could be able to teach them before it's too late.
Yeah, a big thing in for the prison system, to like for drugs or that matter, drug court is something that's like really big. So I think emphasis on drug court really help. Things on putting people on probation, as well as making them attend so many programs, and making them come in and get tested however so often, and just trying to keep them like on a straight and narrow for how many years is decided for probation, to help reduce the chances of them going to.
Yeah, I
agree.
I agree with Malcolm. Just like cutting down on just emphasizing the drug court and cutting down on those kinds of arrests rather than like violent crimes would obviously make the prison rate drop. So I think just focusing on that, because that is just such a topic right now that people are seeing that if you do focus on rehabilitation, recidivism does tend to go down with those like drug only related charges.
Yeah, I agree. The best way to keep them out of the prison system is never put them there in the first place. It's like Malcolm said with probation. Yeah, it does have its problems, but it's the option that we have currently, and it's one that we can build upon, as opposed to just wiping the slate clean and trying to come up with a whole different, approach to it. Probation, given its issues, I mean, that's the best way as of now to keep them out of that system.
When the current set of drug laws were first being enacted, there was a debate in society. I guess there were two separate debates. The first one was whether or not we should be punishing a person for a crime where they're essentially the only victim, which might be the case with drug use. And the second question was whether drug crimes should be punished severely, or whether drug crimes should be treated more as misdemeanors. What is y'all's opinion at either one of those questions? Should drug use be illegal in the first place? And if it is, should it be considered to be a misdemeanor or a felony?
And from my knowledge, drug use, or on the fact of like facilitating drugs, I think that's a bigger issue that people think about. Well, there's somebody, I guess like small towns are like the biggest, or one of the biggest, things. Like they do not want drugs, in their towns at all. So once they start hearing like, people are selling like big narcotics and stuff like that, like they want them out, they want them in jail, because they think about their kids, they think about all these other things. And things like marijuana are something that is people are like seeing more ease about, because just on the fact that it's not something like heroin for something like cocaine or that nature.
Right. On the topic of drug use, I would like to there needs to be some form of punishment. I don't know if that's incarceration, but there does need to see some form of punishment, because like the mental level that some of the drugs can make the drug user can be dangerous to other people. So there needs to be some form of punishment there. I'm not saying it's incarceration, but something needs to be on it. We can't just shrug it off.
Yeah, I agree.
definitely.
I think that you know, if there was like more of a system where it was just like, you know, fines, which I know there are like things coming in place, but I think that if we make the goal, you know, not incarceration when it comes to like nonviolent drug offenses, we will start to see a shift.
I have to agree with Hunter with there needs to be some kind of punishment. I mean, drug use in and of itself, sure, it's the individual. It can be a victimless crime, I guess you can say, but it promotes the behavior that does lead to crime. And so you could have who gets caught in the crossfire with that. It's like even with something simple as drinking. If you get into a car, all of a sudden you have a speeding bullet going down the road, or you could take like a family out. But there needs to be some kind of punishment, that maybe not prison time per se.
So what other kinds of punishment would be available? And keep in mind, so speaking as sort of the John Q. Public, if we make it a crime, but then we don't incarcerate you, either how do we protect ourselves from people who are obviously willing to break the rules, but also how do we make sure that you are learning some kind of a lesson if we're not doing anything to punish you, right? So how do I punish without incarceration?
I'm thinking you could like force them from the court to go to a rehab. They have to go to a rehab for 6 months to a year and try to get clean. They have to take drug tests. It kind of takes a probation feel after rehab, but I think rehab would be a better situation than incarceration.
Yeah, I guess for me, like I would like to think that, you know, obviously rehab would be beneficial to most people, but when it comes to like the logistics of that, I mean, if it was like a state-run like rehabilitation system, would that just be more like a prison, or would it really be like rehab?
I feel like shock probation would be good for these kind of offenses. Shock probation is when a judge orders a convicted offender to prison for a short time and then suspends the remainder of the sentence in favor of probation. So it's that kind of initial punishment, kind of gets the person off the streets. Let's say if they were taking heroin, you know, they're high, they're in that moment, takes them away from the situation, away from the environment, sobers them up, and then they start on probation for rehabilitation for their drug habit.
I believe that it was out in California, or at least it's the first time that I had heard of this. There was a court that began to experiment with partial day incarceration. And for those of you who may not be familiar with it, the logic was that if we were to incarcerate a person for a month, they basically lose their job if they already have one. But if we only incarcerate a person for half of a day for a month, or for half of a day for 2 months, then they're able to maintain something like a normal life and continue to go to work during the day, but then they report to a jail or a prison facility at night. Do you think that that makes sense? Or if a person's engaging in some kind of even a nonviolent crime, is society just better off removing them entirely?
Well, I know here in Kentucky, we do things such as severing weekends. So, you know, people will go out throughout their whole week to try to maintain their job that they already have. And then, you know, on Friday afternoon, they'll go in and they'll serve, or like evening, they'll go in and they'll serve their time through the weekend to try to take up that time.
Yeah, Malcolm's exactly right. We do that here in Kentucky, where you do serve weekends. And I think it does, to some extent, it helps maintain social ties for that person. They can have that occupation, they can keep the relationships, they can, you know, maintain their social capital rather than, you know, throwing them in jail and then they lose all of this. And then when they get out, I mean, they're starting at the very bottom. They have to work their way up all over again. And then the idea is there, well, then why even try? I'll just go back to what I was doing. But I think that it is useful in the sense that it makes it more capable for them to join society again and function.
I also believe like it makes them like actually think about it. Like, okay, well, if I don't change what I'm doing, this is going to get more aggressive. You know, I'm not going to be able to keep this job. I'm going to lose, you know, whatever I have, my house or my car or whatever that I'm trying to maintain, the people I'm trying to take care of in my life. And like just certain weekends it takes out time out of their week that they could, you know, get more hours on work. Something that they could do, like if they're trying to save up for something, you know, it takes them longer. And then it just, I think it actually helps. So therefore, you know, people, you know, even if we didn't use, you know, sending people to rehab facilities, like even this, you know, taking time out of their week from, you know, doing things such as like, you know, using drugs or selling or that nature.
Another idea that I've heard floated around is essentially a modern day equivalent of house arrest or location arrest. I mean, right now, every single one of us has the technology capable to be monitored 100% of the time through GPS location. And so the idea has been floated that we could put either microchipped trackers into people or secured ankle bracelets that are maybe small enough not to be visible to individuals who aren't looking for them, or even just, you know, secured watches on the wrist that can't be removed, so that way that a prisoner's location could be monitored. And then they're restricted to only travel to certain areas, home, work, and maybe to the grocery store. Do you think that a strategy like that would be successful in reducing the prison population? And what impact, if any, do you think that would have on recidivism?
I think that would be pretty resourceful. I think, though, we're kind of just waiting on that technology to kind of get to that point. There was one article I found about technological incarceration, which is exactly as you described. It was more of like you wear like a watch. It's like an ankle bracelet, you know, not as big and clunky, and it can measure your heart rate, what's in your bloodstream. Like if you were on drug charges, you weren't supposed to be obviously taking any illicit substances. It can measure that. And then it can even immobilize you. It can send you a shock through your body like a taser. But I think, yeah, that can be extremely useful if we get to that point where we can utilize it really well and effectively. But yeah, if for smaller crimes, for more or less serious crimes, yes, I think that'd be extremely useful.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially for like first-time offenders, you know, it'd be a really good idea because it still is a punishment without incarceration. But I think, you know, again, what Hunter said, just getting that technology here and getting, you know, the funding for it, you know, after that is when we might be able to see something like that happen.
So we're just about out of time. So I want to, I guess, conclude the session with a kind of a roundtable popcorn question. From each of your perspectives, if our goal is to reform the prisons to reduce the population, what one strategy would you suggest that we pursue as a society? And what do you think the likelihood is that we will actually be able to implement your preferred approach? Mr. Kelly, let's go ahead and start with you.
I would love to see rehabilitation take a higher role in the prison system. I think it would really benefit recidivism, as they would have some form of way to sustain themselves outside of the prison system. However, I really don't see America being able to go all in on a rehabilitation program due to the cost, and it would definitely be expensive to do. So I don't see it happening, but there is a chance. I'm not going to say it's not going to happen, but there is a chance.
Mr. Wilson, what do you think?
I definitely think we need to see more use, although we see it a lot already. I think we need to see probation used as much as it can be, either through the like shock probation or like we just talked about, technological probation when we get there. Yeah, like I said, it's utilized already, but I think that's the best option we have, and it's one that we can work on right now. Like I said earlier, it's better than just wiping the slate clean and starting somewhere new. It's something we can work toward to make it better and more effective. And I think the likelihood, I would say it's higher than something else, just because it's already a standing sort of foundation we can work on.
Mr. Walker, what do you think?
I believe that using funds, whether it's private and public prisons, use it for rehabilitation. I think making that the primary goal, recidivism and bringing people back into society is should be the main goal of prison.
Ms. Manling, you get the final word here.
Yeah, so something that we hadn't really gotten to talk about yet, but I think is a really interesting concept is mentorship when it comes to the prison systems. I know, like, in my hometown, I've seen this a lot with local leaders and local pastors, just coming in and getting to, like, really sit down and talk one-on-one, especially with, like, first-time offenders, also, like, drug offenders, nonviolent crimes. I think it's something that we don't see a whole lot, and I think actually ends up being really helpful for the prisoners while they're in there, and then especially when they come out, because they have connections, back to society. They have new connections, even possible job opportunities. So I think mentorship is something that I would really like to see the prison system focus on as well.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's broadcast. I want to thank each of you who joined us live for joining us, and also for any of you who happened to catch us in our pre-recorded broadcasts. If you like our presentation, please check out one of the topics that we've already covered so far in our series. And also keep in mind that we're going to be in the same place, same time next week, where we're going to be talking about one of the more controversial issues in the current 2020 presidential campaign, the idea of healthcare reform, and specifically looking at the probability or possibility and the consequences of adopting something like a single-payer healthcare system. But until then, thank you very much for joining us, and God bless.